Humans, when presented with an opportunity, have an inconvenient habit of taking it, especially humans who have been sitting in a damp stone cell for weeks, slowly losing interest in everything except fresh air and the faint hope of not dying from boredom. So even without tools, even without real technology, they began studying every tiny flaw in their surroundings. A loose stone became a long-term excavation project, a narrow window became something to diet for, and a distracted guard, well, that was practically a handwritten invitation to leave. And really, that was the heart of most medieval escapes: patience. A kind of slow, stubborn patience that only develops when you have absolutely nothing else to do. Because medieval prisons didn't offer hobbies. There were no books, no cards, no social hour, not even a mildly resentful therapy goose, just stones and darkness and the occasional rat passing by with the confidence of someone who definitely pays rent. So prisoners learned to observe. They learned which guard snored the loudest, which one drank the cheapest wine, and which one had a deeply inconvenient allergy to doing his job. Over time, the cell stopped feeling like a fortress and started feeling like a puzzle. A puzzle with missing pieces, bad lighting, and water damage, but a puzzle nonetheless. Some escaped by digging. Not dramatic Shawshank Redemption digging, more like gently scraping the same spot every night for 14 months with something that was definitely not a tool. A bone, a rock, a bit of broken pottery, whatever could be rubbed repeatedly against stone without attracting attention. They didn't need speed. They needed the sort of quiet determination you usually only see in toddlers trying to push their heads through stair railings. And eventually, after countless nights of scraping, the stone would loosen. Just the smallest amount. Barely noticeable, unless you were the one who had been staring at it for half a year. Then came the moment where they'd gently pull it free, revealing a tiny gap leading into absolute darkness. Not freedom, not yet, just a slightly bigger version of the misery they already lived in. But progress is progress, even if it smells worse than your cell. Other prisoners favored bribery, because medieval guards were famously committed to selling their loyalty for the price of one chicken and a mildly flattering compliment. You didn't always need gold. Sometimes a loaf of bread could do the job, sometimes a jug of wine, and sometimes simply saying, "I bet you're tired of standing there all night," was enough to make the guard hand over the keys out of pure emotional weakness. The catch, of course, was that medieval currency was not especially compatible with being a prisoner. You didn't usually walk into prison with a roasted chicken under your arm. So most bribery came from friends smuggling things in, hidden in bread, hidden in laundry, hidden in other prisoners who had less shame than common sense. The truly impressive escapes, though, came from prisoners who didn't rely on digging or bribing. They relied on studying the architecture itself. Medieval buildings were, at best, enthusiastic attempts at construction. A tower might look sturdy from the outside, but inside it could have gaps wide enough to host a family of pigeons and cracks that whispered, "Honestly, you could leave any time." So prisoners squeezed through chimneys. They climbed up privy shafts, yes, the toilets, because nobody guards a tunnel full of human misery. Some even wriggled behind wall panels, sliding into forgotten service passages designed for servants who had not existed for 200 years. And slowly, painstakingly, they disappeared into the bones of the castle. Not running, not sprinting dramatically through corridors, just inching along in the dark, moving as quietly as someone who knows the walls are full of spiders with questionable intentions. Most escapes didn't involve conflict, no guards tackled, no dramatic sword fights, just a sleepy shuffle into the night through a hole that probably wasn't supposed to exist. And as the prisoner slipped away, somewhere in the castle above, a guard snored loudly enough to be considered complicit. Sometimes the escape didn't even involve the architecture. Sometimes it involved the prisoner themselves, or more accurately, their willingness to temporarily become a human string bean. Because medieval diets weren't famous for their nutritional generosity. If you spent a few months in a cell eating something politely referred to as bread, but more accurately described as compressed disappointment, you naturally lost weight. A lot of it. So a prisoner might look at a tiny window, one built purely for air circulation, not human circulation, and think, maybe. And after 2 or 3 more months of medieval dieting, that maybe became, yes, actually, I can fit through that if I temporarily stop having a ribcage. It was never graceful. No one ever slid through a window elegantly, like a sleek little ferret. It was always more of a slow, awkward, slightly crunchy process, accompanied by the handful of prayers that prisoners suddenly rediscovered when they were halfway through and completely stuck. But eventually, after one last shove, they'd plop out the other side, usually into a moat, a muddy field, or, if they were unlucky, right in front of a cow who stared at them with the judgment of someone who had never broken any laws. Another overlooked factor in medieval escapes was the weather. Rain could be a friend, storms even more so. Because if the guards heard a mysterious scraping sound during a thunderstorm, they didn't think, "Ah, yes, a prisoner achieving freedom." They thought, "Not my problem," and continued their lifelong commitment to ignoring responsibilities. Wind helped too, masking footsteps, covering the quiet clinks of makeshift tools, and sometimes, if fortune was feeling generous, blowing open a poorly latched door. You would be surprised how many medieval prison doors were held closed by nothing more than habit. And then, there were the animals. Rats, mostly. Rats with no concept of fear, personal boundaries, or spatial etiquette. Rats who chewed through bindings, gnawed at wood, and occasionally revealed cracks in the wall simply because they were bored. Some prisoners even quietly followed the rat pathways to discover gaps in the structure, like listening to the world's least hygienic tour guides. Occasionally, a sympathetic animal helped, usually a dog who had no interest in duty, but a deep interest in snacks. And if a prisoner had food, actual food, not the abstract misery the jail provided, dogs became allies very quickly. A guard might not fall for a bribe, but his dog absolutely would. Still, despite all these methods, the most reliable escape tool was simply time. Endless hours, days merging into each other until even the guards lost track of when someone should be checked on. No one in the Middle Ages kept excellent records. Most prison logs were written by men who misspelled their own names. So if a prisoner slipped out one night and no one looked directly at their cell the next morning, they might not be discovered missing until dinner, sometimes until lunch the next day. There were cases where someone escaped, but wasn't reported missing for a week. A week, at which point the guard looked into the cell, saw emptiness, and responded with an emotion best described as, "Huh." But my favorite escapes, the softest, most quietly successful ones, were the ones that relied on clothing. A cloak left drying, a servant outfit borrowed from a careless laundry basket, or a monk's robe, which apparently had the same magical effect as modern high-visibility vests. Everyone assumes you belong there. Medieval prisons did not have uniforms. There was no standard prisoner look, aside from being dirty and vaguely annoyed. So if someone walked calmly through the hallways wearing a guard's cloak and carrying a bucket like they belonged there, hardly anyone questioned it. Most medieval workers survived entirely on the confidence of looking like they were supposed to be holding something. And as the prisoner walked past guard after guard, no one realized a thing. Because in the Middle Ages, if a person walked with purpose, they were automatically assumed to be legitimate. It was medieval psychology at its finest. Eventually, after all the digging, the dieting, the bribing, the crawling, the disguising, the animal alliances, and the very selective use of gravity, the prisoner finally reached the outside, cold air, open sky, space. Freedom never arrived with a triumphant soundtrack. It usually arrived in the form of a cold breeze and the realization that they had no money, no shoes, no plan, and a very long walk ahead of them. But after months or years inside a stone box, even that felt like luxury. And somewhere behind them, in the dim corridors of the prison, a guard was probably waking up from a nap, stretching and thinking, "Something feels off." He was right. But by then, the escapee was already drifting into the night, moving quietly across the fields, leaving nothing behind but a confused castle, a loose stone, and a rat who definitely took most of the credit. Of course, not every escape was a solo adventure. Some prisoners formed partnerships, quiet, uneasy alliances built on mutual desperation and the shared belief that anything outside had to be at least slightly better than the inside. Teamwork in medieval prisons wasn't glamorous, There were no synchronized plans, no whispered strategy sessions worthy of a heist movie. It was usually just 2 or 3 exhausted people agreeing in the dim torchlight. Yeah, let's try this hole together and hope we don't get stuck. And the thing about teamwork is, it sometimes helped. One prisoner could keep watch while the other loosened stones. One could distract a guard by pretending to have a dramatic medieval health crisis, usually involving an overacted groan and a complaint about the humors. And one could quietly slip through the gap they'd spent months creating. But teamwork also had its flaws. Prisoners tended to bond quickly, but trust was optional. There were stories of 2 escape partners cheering each other on for weeks, only for one to crawl through the hole first, and then, quite calmly, walk away without looking back. Not out of cruelty, just practicality. Medieval holes were rarely built for 2. Still, in many escapes, cooperation really did matter, especially when tunnels were involved, because tunnels in the Middle Ages were optimistic. They were dug with enthusiasm, patience, and occasionally a rock pretending to be a chisel. But they were almost always too small, too damp, and far too committed to collapsing at the worst possible moment. A solo tunneler could spend months scraping through the earth, but a group could work in shifts. Someone scraped, someone shaped the dirt piles, someone pressed damp soil into something resembling stability, and someone sat nearby, listening for footsteps with the sort of wide-eyed focus usually reserved for cats spotting invisible ghosts. Even then, tunnels were rarely smooth. They bent awkwardly, turned at strange angles, and sometimes accidentally connected to old sewage lines, which added a very fragrant obstacle to the escape process. But prisoners crawled through anyway, dragging their tired bodies through tight spaces with the determination of people who had discovered the motivational benefits of intense suffering. Eventually, when they emerged, usually covered in mud, dust, and the general essence of being done with life, they would look around at the moonlit world outside the walls. And for a moment, the world felt strangely huge, open, quiet in a way that wasn't threatening. Freedom, at least for a few hours, felt soft. One of the most underrated escape tools was simply listening. Prisoners learned the rhythm of the place. They learned which floorboards creaked, which torches sputtered, which sections of the wall let in faint drafts, and exactly how long a guard took to finish yawning before walking his rounds again. A well-timed escape wasn't fast. It was patient. They waited for the deepest point of the night, the moment when even the guards questioned their life choices, the moment when fatigue settled over the entire castle like a heavy blanket. And in that sleepy hour, the prisoner would make their move. Slow steps, quiet breaths, no sudden motions, just a steady glide forward, as if trying not to disturb the dust. To their surprise, most medieval guards were impressively easy to avoid. Not because they were foolish, though statistically, many were, but because the idea of constant surveillance simply didn't exist yet. If a guard checked on you once during the night, that was already considered a high-performance achievement. Prisoners understood this, which is why so many escapes succeeded not through brilliance, but through the medieval version of slipping out of a boring meeting while no one is looking. And sometimes, the escape wasn't even noticed until morning. A guard would walk up to the cell, do a half-hearted glance inside, and pause, blink, blink again, as if hoping the prisoner might reappear out of guilt. And then he'd sigh the sigh of a man who knew, deep in his heart, that this was going to be a paperwork day. Not that medieval paperwork was particularly thorough. Most escape reports read something like, "Prisoner, gone. How, unknown. Guard responsible, also unknown." But despite all these attempts, not every prisoner escaped successfully. Some made it through the first gate, only to be betrayed by mud. Medieval mud being particularly skilled at clinging to loud, slippery, treacherous opinions. Some were caught when a guard sneezed at the wrong time. Some simply lost their nerve halfway through a tunnel and decided that, on second thought, prison wasn't so bad compared to suffocating underground.